Hi, Yennies, and welcome back. If you are new around here, welcome, welcome. If you are a return listener, welcome back. Thanks for joining me again today. I want to thank those of you that have reached out and offered me feedback on the podcast. I've been getting the DMs and the comments on Facebook and etc. And it really warms my heart to hear that this has been making an impact in your teaching and helping you to lead more skillful and soulful yin classes, because that was the whole point of me starting this podcast. I was like, I got a lot to say on yin. And, maybe I should say it to people that aren't just in my trainings. Maybe I should say it outside of the trainings as well. So thank you for each of those of you that have reached out and offered me some kind words in the DMs, whether that's on Instagram or Facebook or in the comments. Also, huge thank you to those of you who have taken the time to offer a review for the podcast. Giving the podcast a review takes maybe 3 minutes and makes a huge difference. That's what tells the algorithms, whether it be the Apple one or the Spotify one or wherever you're listening to, or the YouTube one if you're watching, that this is valuable content. So if you've been here more than once or twice and you have not yet offered a review, I would be so grateful if you would. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can just take a moment to like the video, make sure you've subscribed, and then partway through, leave me a comment. So as you're watching it, if you have a little, aha, leave me a comment underneath. If you are listening to this on Apple, you could do a 5-star review. I would be super grateful for that. On Apple, you also have the option to offer a written review. And so if you wouldn't mind doing that, I'd be grateful for that as well. And then on Spotify, it's just the stars. So you can give me some 5-star review. If you've been loving this podcast, if you've been returning to it again and again, if you've been finding it helpful, I would be so grateful. Thank you so much. Just take a moment to do it right now. I'll wait. Go ahead. Okay, thank you. Before we dive into today's episode, which I think is going to be a juicy one and probably a little bit controversial, perhaps, I am known for having unpopular opinions. But before we get into that, I wanted to read some feedback that I've gotten from my therapeutic yin training. This is from one of my former students. Nick, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. I felt 100% comfortable around you and loved your warm and humorous teaching style. I absolutely love how you answered all of our questions with so much passion for the subject, and at the same time with so much understanding for us as students who were learning something completely new. At least for me, with a tantric hatha yoga background, it was new to learn about the meridians and the sinew channels. I'm glad that I made this choice and took this training with you. You are an expert in this area. This is totally unquestioned, and my new go-to person for yin yoga trainings. Thank you for everything. And that's from Natalie P. Thank you, Natalie. If you have been looking for a yin training, or you're looking for another yin training, maybe you took one and feel like you just dipped your toe into the world of yin and you want to up-level your skills and learn new things from new teachers, then I would highly encourage you to just look at your app right now, or if you're on YouTube, just look down in the description box. You will see a link there that says get on the wait list. And when you click that link, it'll take you to my Yin Yoga training page. And then if you look way up in the picture, there's an opportunity there with a little button for you to get on the wait list. You just click that button, put your name and email. There's also an opportunity way down on the bottom to get on the wait list. And if you're there long enough, you'll even have a little polite pop-up that will slide into the side saying, hey, do you want to be on the wait list? When you join the wait list, you will be first notified of the training registration opening. So I do that first, a couple weeks before I start putting it on the socials, etc. Waitlist gets first notice. When you're on the wait list, you're also going to get, as a little thank you gift from me when you first join, a sequence, a little free PDF sequence, a yin sequence. Then a few weeks later, you're going to get a little video. And then along the way to registration opening, you're going to get these podcast episodes, little sneaky peeks behind the curtain of my training. So little video clips from the training so that you can check those out, some videos and invitations to practice with me. I typically have a quarterly free class and then also have regular yin classes that run in semesters. So you get all of that on your way to registration opening. So if you've been listening and you've been curious and you want to either do some yin training and you haven't done some, or you did some and are now realizing that you could do with some more, I would love to have you. One of the things that is different about my training is that I am a yoga therapist. So it definitely has a more therapeutic leaning as far as discussing things like trauma and how to hold brave space and all that stuff. And then it's also steeped in traditional Chinese medicine. And of course, if you have questions about my training, just reach out. Just get at me in the DMs and let me know. Okay, so let's get on to today's topic. Today, we're going to talk about whether or not you should be offering hands-on assists or hands-on adjustments in a yin class. Dun, dun, dun. So this is something that I'm actually surprised how often it comes up when I see questions in groups about this. So if you're not really familiar with yin yoga as a style, either because you haven't studied it, you haven't taken a yin training, or because maybe your yin training was kind of short, and so they didn't really have time to go into all the things, which no yin training has time to go into all the things. This is why people will often take several yin trainings over the course of time with different teachers so that they get a well-rounded idea of a yin training and of how to teach yin. Because each teacher, each educator has their own sort of special zone of genius that they offer in their trainings. So it's not unusual for people to do many yin trainings. Just like when you do your hatha training, or your first training, whether it was vinyasa, ashtanga, hatha, whatever you did as a teacher, your first 200 hour was a 200 hour. And so it is not at all inconceivable to think that you could take 200 hours easily in yin as well. Okay. One of the reasons that I wanted to point that out is that if you are new to the podcast or if you're new to yin, you may also want to check out the episode that is, I think it's called What is Yin Yoga? And you may also want to listen to the episode with Paul Grilly. They were early on in the first season. Because if you don't have a great understanding of what yin yoga is and what it's not, then what can happen, and I've said this in numerous episodes before, it's a good analogy, is that we take our regular training, our first teacher training, whether it's vinyasa or hatha or whatever your first training was, and we take some of that with us into our yin classes. And some of it is good to take in, like how to be comfortable in front of a room full of people and things like that. There are definitely skills we learn in our first training that we can bring into yin, but there's also a whole bunch that should be left at the door because yin is such a different kind of practice. Active, more dynamic, more moving form of practice is focused on proprioception. So like, where is my body in space? So when you are, for example, standing at the front of your mat and you have to step back to do a high lunge, knowing where your foot should land behind you without looking is proprioception. And these movement forms of yoga are really excellent at cultivating the skill of proprioception. Yin's secret superpower is interoception. And again, there was a whole episode on that as well. But in brief, interoception is an awareness of what's happening inside of us. So a yin yoga practice comes from the inside out, whereas a more movement, dynamic, flowing practice tends to come from the outside and then move in. So for example, you're working mostly on proprioception, and then at the end, you might have maybe, if you're lucky, some meditation, a decent amount of shavasana, perhaps some subtle breath work. Okay, but that's usually kind of towards the end of class in a more movement or dynamic or flowing practice. Whereas in yin, that's not the case. In yin, we're starting really quickly with our interoception. Now, there may be a little bit more talking from the teacher at the start of class, especially if they know that there's folks that are new. That's a skillful thing to do as a teacher, is if you've got newbies, to at least just do a brief little bit of talking about what the heck this Yin Yoga business is. And then please shut up from there on. So I just want to point this out, this proprioception, interoception concept again, which again, we've talked about in past episodes, because that is key to understanding why yin is taught differently and why I'm going to just go way out on a limb with my unpopular opinion and say that hands-on adjusts and hands-on assists are not appropriate in a yin yoga classroom. I'm going to back this up, don't worry. Now, we could question, actually, and because this episode will be coming out right after 3 episodes to do with trauma, so there'll be an episode on trauma in the nervous system. There'll be an episode on, can we make yin yoga trauma informed, or is yin yoga trauma sensitive? And then we're going to hear from one of my former students, now colleagues, and about how she used yin yoga to go through her journey. So right before this episode comes live, there will have been 3 of those back to back that you can check out if trauma and being trauma sensitive or being trauma informed is something that's kind of new to you. And there are whole styles of yoga where they insist that you must touch every single person in the room. This is sort of outdated and antiquated viewpoint, in my opinion. If we are trying to teach in a trauma-informed space, which I hope all teachers are, then it may not be appropriate to touch your students. Now, I'm talking about not just in a yin class, I'm talking about all the classes. So before we get into whether or not you should touch people in yin, I want to talk about, should we touch people in yoga? So first, we also need to break down these words, adjusts and assists. They're very vague. They're a little bit confusing because some people, when they say they offer an adjustment or an assist, mean I'm going to use my hands to guide you deeper into the pose than you could go on your own. In fact, there are whole lineages of yoga. Those are the styles that say you must always touch everyone in the room that do that, where they're sort of, in my case, it would be woman handling if I was doing it, or man handling you and like guiding you deeper into the pose than you can do on your own. I have a lot of problems with that. For one, most yoga teachers are not educated enough in anatomy and kinesiology to know whether or not that is safe for that particular student. Right? So just because something is safe for one student doesn't mean it's a safe adjustment for the very next student. Okay, so each student has their own individual bodies, their own individual bone structures, their own body proportions, et cetera, et cetera. That's not including things like issues and injuries and dominant hands and feet and all the things. So as student, from student to student, they're different. So going in with the same sort of rote, everybody gets this adjustment, is not skillful. And I'm sorry, I know that there are whole lineages of yoga where this is a thing. History does not need to be the future. I'm going to say that one more time. History does not need to be the future. When we learn more, we do better. So I'm against going in and automatically offering hands-on adjusts, period, in any yoga class. Now, I'm going to use adjustments and assists because they seem to be used sort of wishy-washy interchangeably. Like if you were to say to the average student, what's the average teacher, sorry, what's the difference between a hands-on assist and a hands-on adjustment? They'd be like, even the average student would do that, right? Personally, the only people that I want, air quotes, adjusting me are my freaking chiropractor or my osteopath or my physiotherapist. Because yoga teachers do not have the knowledge, skill, experience, or frankly, licensure to be running around adjusting people and moving their body. Okay. In this day and age, if you want to teach in a trauma-informed way, one of the biggest things you can consider is not touching your students. So that's adjustments, assuming you're trying to deepen the pose. And that could also be what some people call assists. And now, right now, as a yoga teacher, you might be thinking, yeah, but I don't do that. Like, I don't do these, I don't use my hands to get people to go deeper into a pose. I use my hands to bring awareness to an area of the body. Right. So you could be using your hands to deepen a pose or to air quotes, you bring awareness of alignment, air quotes, because again, in yin, there is no such thing as one size fits all alignment. So if you are, for example, going up to your student in a more active class and they are in downward dog and you're doing that adjustment where you're turning their upper arms so that it's correct, air quotes, alignment, that doesn't work for everyone's bone structure. And so you can potentially be injuring your students by thinking you're correcting their alignment to keep them safe. You might actually be injuring them over time. But even if you're not injuring them, you're indirectly telling them that their body is not doing the pose right. Your body is not doing this pose right. Let me come around and use my hands to show you the right way. And then if they can't do the air quotes right way, now they feel like some kind of a failure. And now we wonder why people say, oh, I can't do yoga, I'm not flexible. If you go to yoga and you're constantly being corrected and told that you're not doing it right, that you don't have the right alignment, that you've missed the point, I mean, no wonder people think you have to be a certain way to do yoga. So I am not a fan of using my hands on a student I don't just teach yin, by the way, folks. In fact, I taught hatha, alignment focused hatha, for quite a few years before I really specialized in yin. So it's not like I don't know what I'm talking about here. But when you go over to a student and you're using your hands, and it's also not like I didn't do some of these things, FYI. When you go over to a student and you're using your hands to either deepen the expression of their pose, meaning you're putting them into the pose deeper than they could do on their own, that is problematic. Number two, if you're using your hands to, air quotes, correct their alignment, also problematic. Okay, so that's what I would call adjustments, right? You're going in and you're reshaping, retweaking the body, right? Now, some of you might be thinking, yeah, Nick, but I don't do that. I mean, when I touch my students, it's just to create an awareness of an area. Now, this I understand because even though, as just mentioned, I don't just teach yin, I also teach therapeutic yoga, which is sort of hatha based with a few extra bells and whistles thrown in. And so I do understand this. There are those students that no matter how many times you give them a cue, and not to air quotes correct their pose as in they're doing it wrong, but just to create an awareness of, hey, we're trying this shape because we want to do this and A equals to B. And if they're missing it and you've called it out a few times, sometimes it's that their body can't do that, what you're asking, in which case definitely not going over and adjusting them. That's not helpful. But sometimes it is just that they are maybe, for example, a super visual learner. And so they don't really have an awareness of their actual body. One I can think of quite easily in this is when somebody is in a forward fold or downward dog and they've got their back really rounded, and in downward dog, they've got all the weight in their hands and they're quite tight and they're not bending their knees. And so like downward dog feels like torture to them because they have all the weight in their arms, their back super rounded, and they're dying there. When that happens, it can be helpful, or I have found it helpful in the past, if I've verbally cued a few times and they're not getting it because they're working and they're exerting themselves in that pose. So they're struggling while I'm finding ways to rephrase things so that they hopefully get it. Sometimes in the past, I have come and just put my hand on their back super lightly and said, can you take your back away from my hand? Right. So I have done that maybe 4 times in the last 9 years. It's not a lot. And I teach full time. That would be what I would consider an assist. Now, assists are also used, that word is also used for things like, oh, I'm going to assist you while you do a drop back. So even the languaging of adjustments and assists is so gray and murky, and we don't know what each other's talking about. So then when someone says, should you do hands-on adjustments in yin or should you do assists in yin? It's like, well, first of all, what are you even talking about? And secondly, my answer would be no. We could debate until the cows come home whether or not you should offer hands-on adjusts or assists in your other classes that are not yin. And again, you've just heard me say I've got a lot to say about that. I really think that that is far too common, and that as teachers, we could really challenge ourselves and grow as teachers if we can find a way to stop touching and to use our words and demonstrating with our own body as a way of teaching the student. So I know that there are whole styles of yoga that have been where you've been taught that you need to walk around the room and not demo the poses and just use your words. I don't know why people teach that. That is, pardon my French, but fucking ridiculous. Because that does not work to all learning styles. That is assuming that everyone in that room is an audio learner, meaning they're going to learn best by hearing. As you're walking around the room saying things, they're going to learn the best by hearing you. That's a very small percentage of the population that's an audio learner. So what about the people that are visual learners? You're walking around, you're not showing them anything. That's why you'll see students stop and start looking around and looking at the person next to them on their mat. And some teachers even encourage them to look at the person next to them on their mat and copy them, which is terrible because the person next to them, first of all, maybe doesn't want to be a human spectacle. And second of all, doesn't have the same body. So me copying somebody on the mat next to me, that's not a good idea. That could be injurious to my body. Plus, that person beside me wants to probably have their own practice. They want to enjoy themselves without feeling like somebody's constantly staring at them. Somebody who's new to the practice is staring at them instead of the teacher, who could be up at the front demonstrating poses. I'm not saying do the whole practice with your students. I don't think that's skillful either. But like demoing, showing this is what I'm doing, and then maybe you come out and you look around and see how everyone's doing, right? So anyways, I know that there are those of you that have been taught to not demo at all, to walk around the room and to guide students with your voice. Well, whoever taught that initially does not have a good understanding of learning styles. We have visual learners, we have audio learners, we have kinesthetic learners. If you are to be a skilled teacher, you want to have things for all of those learning styles. Yes, you use your words for the audio learners. You demonstrate and you use languaging that is a visualization for the visual learners. And you show for the kinesthetic learners in your body. Now, occasionally, if somebody's super kinesthetic, they may miss some of your cues. And that's where sometimes I've come around and just said, I've got my hand on your back. Can you take your back away from my hand, for example? But the touch from my hand is very light. And I've said to them already before I touch them, is it okay if I put my back on your hand? Or my hand on your back on my hand? That would be a whole other trick, wouldn't it be? So first of all, I'm asking permission. I'm doing a very light touch, light enough, firm enough that they can feel my hand. I'm not being creepy, and firm enough that they can feel my hand there. But the hand is just a touch point for them to reference their own body. I'm not pushing on them. I'm not trying to tweak them. I'm not trying to adjust them. I do not believe in that, period, the end, full stop. So let's get into how this affects a yin practice. Well, if we acknowledge that everybody is different, which we do in yin, that there is no one size fits everybody, and that when we look out at our room, we may have multiple different expressions of poses as we look around the room, that, person A is not going to look the same as person B and C and D. And we acknowledge that yin yoga is a functional practice, not an aesthetic practice, meaning we acknowledge that the point of the yin pose is the function of the pose, not what the pose looks like. So if I'm doing a shape in a sequence to access a hamstring, for example, then that is the point of the pose. And it doesn't matter what anyone looks like. If they're feeling a stretch in their hamstring, great. Then they're all doing it correctly. Now, if they're not feeling a stretch in their hamstring because they're super bendy, well, then you give them other things to focus on. but I'm not going to be correcting their alignment. So if I'm not correcting alignment in a yin practice, because I acknowledge that yin yoga is a functional form of yoga, not an aesthetic form of yoga, that it doesn't matter what these shapes look like. What matters is what is the person feeling. So if I acknowledge that, and I acknowledge that yin yoga is an inside out practice, that it is about interoception, an awareness of what is happening inside of them, then why would I need to touch my students at all? If you're not trying to put them deeper into a pose because it's an inside out experience and they should really only be doing 50 to 60% of the most they could do anyway. So if the student is practicing interoception, coming from the inside out in their practice, noticing how they feel, and then making their choices for their shapes according to how they feel as an individual. If the practice is functional, not aesthetic, meaning that it's what does the pose feel like or what is the function of this pose, that's important, not what does it look like, then why would I need to touch my students? Instead, what I want to be able to do is very skillfully explain to them and give them hints about dropping in and noticing. So here's an example of this that sometimes comes up in yin from students. Am I doing this pose right? Well, I don't know. What are you feeling? If the point of the pose is for you to feel a stretch in your hamstring and you're feeling that in that 50 to 60% zone and you're not causing yourself any pain or injury, then yay, you're doing it right. But the doing it right comes back to, I don't know. Tell me what you're feeling. So you're continually guiding the students back to their own body, their own agency of their own body, their own individual uniqueness, and permission for them to explore what that pose looks like for that body in that day, at that stage of their life. And you're trying to teach your students how to drop inward and notice what's happening inside of them. So if that's the goal of yin, which I would argue it is, and if this is all news to you, you got some episodes you can catch up on for sure. So if that's the premise of yin, if we're acknowledging that this is a quiet, still practice, if we're acknowledging that the students all have unique bodies and unique shapes and unique needs, and we're trying to teach our students how to drop inward and to notice what's happening in their body and to know what the function of the shape is, and then to choose their version for their own body based on what they're feeling, then why do I need to touch them? Why would I need to adjust them? What am I adjusting? What am I assisting? I got nothing. Now, I want to be really clear. I'm not saying I don't leave my mat in a yin class. I do occasionally, not often, but I do occasionally. So, for example, if everybody's in a shape and I can just see that somebody's super uncomfortable, maybe they're new to yoga or they're new to yin, or they haven't done that particular pose in their body in a yin way, and they're really struggling to get comfortable, I may go over and offer them a prop. Now, I also, because I'm a trauma informed teacher, don't just get up and start moving around the room. I would say, I'm just going to move around the room for a few minutes to help some of your yoga friends get more comfortable. If I come over to you and offer you a prop to get you more comfortable and it makes you more comfortable, yay. If I come over and offer you a prop and it actually doesn't improve the way you feel in the shape, then please ignore me. So I'll say that, and then I'll go around and I'll help a couple people who are uncomfortable. And then I'll just say, I'm heading back to my mat now. And again, that is because I'm a trauma-informed teacher. If you want to learn more about that, there's 3 episodes previous to this one that you can check out on trauma and how it affects the way we teach. So if I'm trying to teach people to drop into their own body, to see what feels right for them, and to have the agency to choose for themselves, regardless of what that looks like, and to have an awareness of what's happening inside of their body, then why would I need to touch them? So oftentimes these things come around because, as I've mentioned in other episodes, we take our first teacher training and we learn all these things. I always call them our little suitcases. So we come into Yin with our little suitcases of all of the knowledge that we've learned in our other trainings without stopping to think, does this serve this particular practice, this particular style? Could I leave some of this baggage or little suitcases at the door for Yin, because it actually has nothing to do with Yin and it's not helpful in Yin. And in fact, it kind of hinders Yin. So I've talked in many past episodes about some of these little suitcases that need to get left at the door. And for today, the little suitcase that needs to get left at the door before you start teaching your Yin is hands-on adjusts or assists. Now, I know that I'm going to hear blowback, usually from teachers that not necessarily because they are so attached to giving them, but often you'll hear teachers saying, oh, but I love it when people touch me in yoga. Okay, go to an active class then. Don't go to a Yin class. Or if you're really in need of some nurturing touch, go get a massage, go get some acupuncture, etc. One of the biggest goals from a Yin yoga practice is to encourage interoception, to have people slow down and get quiet enough to know what's going on inside of their body. And people can't go into interoception and really making choice based on their own body and agency if you're going to go around and touch them and tell them what they should be doing instead. Now, I will say that I know friends and I have other people I know that do classes where they might do, Yin and slash acupressure, or Yin and then a Yin and Pin class, for example, Yin yoga and then acupuncture afterwards. If you as a teacher are a trained acupressurist, and I don't mean you took some myofascial Yin training and now you think you can go around poking everyone's points. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about people who are actually Chinese medicine practitioners. They're actually medical Qigong practitioners. They've actually taken shiatsu training, people who have studied these acupressure and acupuncture points in depth. And that's part of what they do for their living. Not like, oh, I took a 20-hour course and now I'm going to go around and poke people's acupressure points. Because that would be unskillful. Because just like everything else, there is not one acupressure point for every person. That is a good idea. There's a reason why Chinese medicine doctors and acupuncturists take many, many years of schooling and study, and that is because they learn how to properly diagnose the individual and choose points that are custom for that individual. So if you are going around and you have not done an intake, you have not done a waiver, you have not met with each student individually to learn about what's going on for them in their body, and now you're pushing on points on their body, bad news and out of your scope of practice. Now, if you are an acupuncturist, if you are a medical Qigong practitioner, if you are into shiatsu, that's a different story because you will have an understanding of chatting with people beforehand and finding out what's going on for them. And you will choose points according to that particular person's needs, or at least you're going to leave out points if they're not appropriate or if they're contraindicated for that particular person. So, for example, and because people think somehow that acupressure is so innocent, there are certain points that you would not stimulate on a pregnant woman. And if you don't know what those are, then you shouldn't be touching people in class and pushing on their points. Okay, soapbox and rant over with that one. So, if you are qualified and trained to do those things, like Yin and Pin, where you're going to come and put needles in at the end, or if you are trained to do acupressure, acupuncture, then that's a different story in your class. However, you still need to make it very clear if you're qualified to do those things. And if you are not qualified to do those things, stop doing them. You're working out of your scope of practice. That's irresponsible. But if you are qualified to do those things, for those rare few magical unicorns listening to this right now going, yeah, but I am an acupuncturist, or yes, but I have studied medical Qigong, or yes, but I am a shiatsu practitioner. For you magical unicorns, if you want to do those classes, please do, but please make it really clear in the class description that you will be touching people, right? So people should know when they read your class description that you will be putting pressure or needles on certain points. Like they should know that, and that should be part of what they're signing up for. That is a very different thing than the average drop-in yin class. And now all of a sudden the yoga teacher is walking around pushing on points on people or adjusting or giving assists in their shapes. So again, if a yin yoga practice is an inside out practice and you're walking around touching everybody, probably not skillfully, because most yoga teachers are actually, believe it or not qualified to be adjusting and assisting bodies. So I think, again, this comes down to what often happens in the yoga industry because we are unregulated, unlicensed. And I'm not saying I want regulation and licensure. In fact, if that happens, I will quit saying I'm a yoga teacher. But what I am saying is that we need to have the humility to stay in our scope of practice. And even though I studied Chinese medicine for almost 3 years, and even though I have a boatload of extra anatomy courses, surface anatomy, A&P, blah, 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 and even though I have studied tri-yoga massage, and even though I studied how to do hands-on yin, so facilitated stretching with Paul Grilly, even with all of that in my background, I do not touch my students in their yoga class because I want them to have still and quiet time to be able to drop into their own body, to see what it is that they're feeling, to identify their needs. And I can help them with that. If they're like, I don't know how to do that, I can give them some coaching on that. But that is the point of them coming to yin, is for them to know what is the best shape for my body tonight or today or this morning, whatever it is. I'm trying to teach them to drop inward so that they have the agency to make their own choices for what is going to work in their body. So I'm not going to go move them into a shape. I'm going to let them choose their version of the shape based on what they're feeling and what's going on with them. And my job as a yin teacher is that if people find that difficult, because interoception is not something we practice on a daily basis out in the rest of the world. So if they find interoception difficult, then my job is to coach them on how they might become more aware of what's happening on the inside of them. Right? My job is to ask them questions like when they say things like, am I doing this right? Well, I'm not sure. Tell me where you're feeling this. And if they're like, I'm not feeling anything, then I would ask them maybe to put their own hand, if they can, on the area of the body that I was intending, although that may not be where they feel it because we're all different, and say, my intention is this area here. Do you feel any sensation there? And if they say, oh, yeah, okay, I do, then now we're going to say, okay, is that sensation in that 50 to 60% range? And then how can you get yourself more comfortable here so that you can experience that sensation and not be gripping and holding and, tightening up other areas? This is where we can bring in props and be skillful that way. So my job is to coach, encourage, and teach them how to drop into their own inner landscape and find what works for them. It is not my job to, air quotes, correct their alignment. It is not my job to deepen their pose. None of that is in my job description. Period. Full stop as a yoga teacher, and especially as a yin yoga teacher. So even though I'm talking about this from a yin perspective, from the perspective of interoception and people choosing what works for their body and being functional and all of this stuff that I'm talking about of what makes yin different, I would argue actually that in the yogaverse in general, there is far too many yoga teachers' hands on far too many yogis' bodies, and that most yoga teachers do not have the skill to be able to skillfully offer hands-on adjustments. Even if you took your little hands-on adjustment weekend workshop, no. I'm talking about years of anatomy study, like a physiotherapist would, like a kinesiologist would, okay? Like a massage therapist would. You don't have that background, you don't have enough knowledge to be manipulating people's bodies. Now, sometimes I know people like to just offer a little bit of sort of gentle massage or just kind of a gentle, like putting their hands down and saying, breathe into my hands, that kind of thing. That's not designed to deepen the pose. But again, you shouldn't be offering massage unless you've got training in massage. You shouldn't be offering acupressure unless you are an TCMD, unless you are a medical Qigong practitioner, or unless you're a Shiatsu person. You shouldn't be doing acupressure on other people. It's beyond your scope of practice. So, dear yoga teachers, can we stay in our own fucking lane and just focus on teaching yoga really well without all this hands-on business? And again, for those unicorns, you know who you are listening, that have the training and the experience in those other areas, and you're going to offer that. Let's say you're a massage therapist and you're a yoga teacher. You're an acupuncturist and you're a yoga teacher. You are a shiatsu practitioner and a yoga teacher. You're a medical qigong practitioner and a yoga teacher. For those magical unicorns, please feel free. You have the training, you have the experience, but just put it in your class description. To be trauma informed, people need to know that when they show up, they're going to be getting touched. So make it very clear in your description. In this class, we will be offering hands-on blah, 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 whatever it is. Or we will be offering needles in Shavasana, or whatever the case may be. Okay, so make sure, if you're going to do that, that you have it listed in your class description and that you're even qualified to offer these things. And again, for those teachers who are thinking right now, yeah, but I've taken all these workshops on how to offer hands-on assists. That doesn't matter, because those workshops that teach you how to offer hands-on assists are giving you one size fits all ways to adjust and assist students. It is assuming that all of your students have the same bones, and they do not. So there is no one way to offer a hands-on adjustment or assist in a pose, because all of your students are totally different and unique. And I realize that sometimes when we hear this kind of information, we can have a bit of shell shock, because we've spent all this money and time and training learning these styles of yoga, and we've been just doing automatically whatever it was that our teacher taught us or whatever we were trained to do in that style of yoga, without stopping to question, is this wise? Do I want to do this? What is the point of this actually? But you really need to ask questions always. So if we're going to be wise and skillful teachers, then we need to ask questions. We need to ask questions from those in their trainings. We need to question what we were taught and decide, does that work for me? Does that fit with what I think is right in the world? Is that something that I want to do? Is that something that's helpful? These are all questions that you need to ask yourself. You shouldn't be just doing automatically what your teacher training taught you to do without first pausing to question it. So there's a certain point as a teacher where you have to reach the maturity to question things. One of my favorite quotes, which is attributed to the Buddha, we don't know for sure if the Buddha said it, because it's not like they were writing stuff down back then, but here it is. Do not believe anything simply because you have heard it. Do not believe anything simply because it is spoken and rumored by many. Do not believe anything simply because it is written in your religious books. Do not believe anything merely on the authority of your teachers or elders. Do not believe in traditions because they have been handed down for many generations. But after observation and analysis, when you find anything that agrees with your reason and is conducive to the good and benefit of one and all, then accept it and live up to it. Attributed to the Buddha. So, as teachers, if you walked into your yin classroom with some of these little suitcases, these baggage things from your first training that maybe you never questioned in your first training, but we do need to start questioning them now. If you haven't already, when you're starting to teach yin, you need to start questioning what you have been taught, because yin is a different practice. So, in my opinion, there is no room for hands-on adjusts and assists in a yin practice. I would argue that if you want to lead trauma-informed spaces in your other yoga classes too, that you should start letting that go, but that is perhaps a rant for another time. And again, the 3 episodes before this talk about trauma. So if this is something that's kind of new to you, please check those out. But when we walk into, now I'm about to teach yin, things need to change. It is different. Yin yoga is not just like regular yoga with longer holds. And so we need to leave some of the baggage at the door. And in this episode, the suitcase that we're talking about that you should leave at the door is offering hands-on adjusts and hands-on assists in a yin practice. Now, again, there's a slight exception for those of you who are qualified to do acupressure, massage, acupuncture, etc. For those of you who do that as your livelihood, you have the certification, the training, the licensure, etc. If you are offering that in your yin classes as a special little awesome bonus that makes you unique, if that's your special sauce in your classes, party on with yourself, but just make sure it says so in the description. Because if people have been to a bunch of other yin classes and they've never been touched, and now they show up to yours and you're all up in their business, again, it's not trauma sensitive. So just say in your class description, in this class, blank, blank, blank will be offered. So, acupressure, acupuncture, etc., massage. Just let them know so that when people sign up, they're going because they want that little treat, right? They're not caught off guard. So I know that this won't be necessarily the most popular episode. I know that anytime I've seen this come up in Facebook groups, I've seen a lot of teachers get pissy about it because they like somebody adjusting them in their yoga classes. When they, as a teacher, go to classes, they love it when people touch them. Fine. But that doesn't mean that should happen in a yin room, number one. And it doesn't mean that that's what you should do to your students. Why would you assume that all of your students want that? And again, most are not qualified enough. So, for example, something as small as putting your hands on someone's lower back when they're in child pose, which is a common adjustment, one hand on either side of their sacrum, and then kind of putting a little pressure on one hand and then switching and doing a little pressure, kind of rocking back and forth with your hands on their sacrum. Seems really innocent, doesn't it? Not if someone's got SI issues, not if somebody's pregnant. You can see where I'm going with this. There are acupressure points, for example, you do not do on someone who's pregnant. And if you do not know these things, then you shouldn't be touching people in your classes. And if you really want to offer, if you don't have any of these skills and you really want to offer, a yin with massage element, why don't you teach a yin workshop on yin and self-massage? You can show them how to massage their own feet and their own shoulders and temples and whatever, if that's something that you want to do. All right, I think I've ranted enough about this. Again, I am the queen of unpopular opinions. And so I realize I'll get some blowback on this, but I don't care. And the reason I don't care is because my goal when I'm teaching my teachers and when I'm giving you information in this podcast to help you in your teaching is to create an industry with epic, beautiful, informed, and educated teachers who offer soulful, brave spaces for the public. That's my goal. So there you go. Hopefully this was helpful. So I know that for some of you, you might be feeling like the yoga mat has just been pulled out from underneath you because it never occurred to you to not automatically offer adjusts and assists. And in that case, I would highly recommend you take a trauma training. Nicole Marcia, who was in the second of the last 3 episodes, is who I did my trauma training through. There's links to her website there. She does some online. Highly recommend every yoga teacher, even if you don't want to specialize in populations where you think there's trauma. If you work with humans, you're working with trauma. We all got some trauma. Little trauma, big trauma, medium-sized trauma, old trauma, new trauma, all the traumas. So if you're new to that idea that you shouldn't just be all up in everyone's business, touching them, manipulating them, adjusting them, please take some time to learn about that, to take some trauma informed training. Listen to the episodes that came before this one so you can really get an understanding of kind of the nuances of this. I would argue again that we can let go of these things in all styles of yoga, but definitely don't be bringing that suitcase into yin. I hope that you got something out of this episode, even if it was like the tough love kind of got something out of this episode, even if you're feeling a bit like your buttons have been pushed, if you're feeling a little bit ungrounded now because you're like, oh my God, now I'm questioning all the things. I'll leave you with this piece of advice, which I probably should have started with, but here we go. When I did my very first teacher training, one of my teachers, the primary teacher actually, at the very beginning of training said, in this training, there will be things that will upset you, that will push your buttons, that will call into question what you believe. There will be paradigms shifts that will pop up in this training that you will want to immediately reject because they don't fit with your current worldview, your narrative, what you believe, what you've been told, what you've been taught, etc. And what she told us is when you're feeling that way, when you're feeling like you've just been, someone's just pushed you a little bit and you're like, what? Take the time to pause and to ask yourself some questions like, is this upsetting me because I feel it's genuinely in my heart and my being? It's not true. It doesn't fit with my values, my beliefs. This is just not resonating. It's not true. In which case, she said, and I would give to you as well, toss it out then. It's not for you. If, however, you're feeling a little bit tweaked by it, a little bit ungrounded, if you're feeling defensive, if you're feeling kind of like you're in freeze mode because it's new information and you don't know how to process it, and that's not the case, then ask yourself why. Why are you feeling so attached to the way that you believe, the way that you have thought of things in the past? And is that serving you? And could you let that go? That was in my very first teacher training that she said that on day one. And I'm sure glad she did because there was definitely some things that came up where I was like, wait, say what? What? So one of the ways that we practice interoception as teachers is that when we have new information that may jar us, it may leave us feeling a little bit assaulted, may have been some tough love thrown down here and you may be struggling with that. Pause, process before you react. Ask yourself questions, sit with it, study it. Do you want to push it out and not listen to it just because this is the way you've always done things and you don't like change? Or does it just not actually resonate? If you take the time to analyze it and go, you know what? No, I just don't believe that this is actually true for me, then let it go. But if you're reacting because it's new information, you need to sit with that and then decide. All right, my friends. Until we meet again, I hope you stay well, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye for now.